Today's commencement speaker is Dr. Paul Turman, who became chancellor of the Nebraska State College System in 2019. Since joining the NSCS, Turman has worked with the governor and the legislature to create the Career Scholarship Initiative, approve funding for Chadron State's Math Science addition and renovation, and developed a partnership with the Department of Corrections and Peru State to create a corrections pathway. He has also worked to help with funding to address maintenance and repair needs at the colleges, implemented the 2025 strategic plan, and led the state colleges through historic flooding in 2019 and the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Turman has been involved in several different boards, including the University of Nebraska Medical Center Rural Health Advisory Committee, the Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Commission, the Nebraska Information Technology Commission. He earned his doctorate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in interpersonal communication, his master's degree from South Dakota State University in communication, and his bachelor's from South Dakota State University in general studies. Please welcome Dr. Paul Turman.
Well, thank you, President Ryan. Good morning, Chadron State College graduates, family members, our great faculty and our staff, any distinguished guests that we have here today. It certainly is my pleasure to have the opportunity to commemorate this culminating events that many of you have set out to achieve so many years ago. Just over 3 years ago, I think I've been very lucky to be appointed by the Nebraska Board of Trustees to serve as the chancellor of the Nebraska State College System. I often find myself having to explain essentially what it is that a chancellor does and what my day-to-day job responsibilities might be in higher education administration. On one occasion, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to explain that to one of my young sons who was in elementary school, where I basically said, I spend a lot of time coordinating meetings, I bring a lot of people together, I lead projects, I do different initiatives. His response when trying to explain that to one of his young friends a few years later, when they asked, what is it that your dad does? His simple explanation was, my dad's a party planner. So, on some levels, I would say that he's captured kind of the essence of some of the things that I do in my day-to-day work. However, there are often times I think people have different perceptions of the title and the position, which then does really require me to provide some additional explanation. I recall just simply about 2 months ago at a wedding down in Texas, I found myself explaining yet again what it is that I do to a friend of the groom. Boy, you must have been your class valedictorian, was the response that came back. Before I answered, I waited for the laughter to die down from my wife and said, well, no, not exactly. I think oftentimes the title of chancellor, one might assume that I've had the opportunity to provide commencement addresses numerous times over the past 30 years. But today, that will be my first. Hopefully I do you all well. I was really bragging up the commencement speaker at the Holiday Inn Express in the lobby this morning. Had I been allowed to give the address to my high school commencement class, I'm not really sure what my message might have been to my fellow classmates. Now that I've been presented this opportunity to present that today, I've decided to focus my comments on 3 critical life lessons that over the past 30 years that I think might positively impact graduates today as you leave Chadron State College and begin your careers and begin to influence the communities and the regions that you eventually choose to live in. So I'll start off. Lesson number 1. Who you are now and who you are today does not have to completely define who you become in the future. For a good portion of my life, I let the perceptions of what others thought of me determine and limit some of the options that I chose for my future. I grew up in a middle-class family with a father who worked for the county. My mother was a secretary for the local state agency in our community. While both of them attempted college, neither one of them finished. And I would say that my high school experience reflected coursework for someone who really didn't plan to go on to college. I wouldn't say that I was underprepared, just that I wasn't encouraged to take advantage of the various opportunities to go on to college and then ultimately be successful. As a family, we very seldom ever discussed goals about what high school would look like or what our time after high school would be. We certainly didn't think about the importance of taking a college preparatory curriculum. I actually had 38 students in my high school graduating class, and 2 of those were foreign exchange students. As I referenced earlier, I was not the valedictorian. I was not the salutatorian asked to give comments to my fellow graduates. I wasn't even in the top half of my graduating class. But with a little bit of luck, I decided to go on to college, and I eventually attended South Dakota State University. Later, when I met my future wife while I was at SDSU, I was relatively honest about my academic abilities, and despite having a relatively good 3.0 grade point average in my undergraduate programs, it was evident that her early perceptions of me continued for quite some time. When I entered graduate school, one of my papers was selected to be presented at a national conference, and as I prepared, I rehearsed in front of my wife. At one point during that presentation, a very peculiar look came over her face, and I stopped and I said, "What, did something not sound right? Did something not make sense there?" She replied, "No, I was listening to you, and you just sounded really smart." I said, "Well, is that bad? Do I need to say something different to tone it down for the audience?" To which she replied, "No, I just never really thought of you as being very smart." I would say that opportunities continued to present themselves to me, and I was accepted into a PhD program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and graduated now more than 20 years ago. My first job actually was as a faculty member at the University of Northern Iowa, where I moved my family and we continued to work at changing people's long-held perceptions. One evening, I recall a plumber coming to our home and noting that he was doing work on Dr. Johnson's house just behind us, and he needed to go down into our basement to see the direction of the plumbing. And then after he came up and left, my wife made the comment, "Boy, we must have moved into a really good neighborhood." I'm like, "Well, why would you say that?" She goes, "Didn't you hear? There's a doctor that lives behind us." I had to remind her, "There's a doctor that lives here in this house." To which she commented, and she's accurate, "I guess I'm not a real doctor," in her minds. I would say there are still times that I run into people who I know outside of my work life who would never know what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis, nor would they ever even envision that I have a PhD. When put in the position of trying to explain that, I tend to receive the same response. Those who knew me long ago often respond, "Wow, Chancellor, you? Really?" I tend to kind of brush that off and just make the common joke that I have that I really only make my wife call me Chancellor, and I move on. As a part of this lesson, I think you as graduates are going to be presented with a wide range of opportunities in the years that come, and those opportunities will evolve you in ways that you really can't imagine today. Don't let people's perceptions of you today define and influence which of those opportunities you choose to take back and move forward with. Lesson number 2, you can always go back home. It is likely that a good number of the graduates here today are planning to return to their home communities or the home regions in which they came. There was a point when I left home and went to college that I really envisioned that I was going to move back to my hometown of Fort Pierce, South Dakota. However, as years went on and I finally realized that that was not going to be something that was going to be possible for me, especially at a professional level, it just didn't seem viable. When my older brother was getting married, my parents had planned to provide them with a portion of their property as a wedding present. Before my father presented this gift, he had asked me if there was any chance that I would come back home. If so, he would save a small portion of that property for me and my family. I remember my exact statement to him at that time was, "I am never moving back to Fort Pierce, South Dakota." And I think maybe lesson 2.1 here. If your parents ever offer you property, take that property. Yeah, absolutely, I'm coming back home. But just 6 short years later, an opportunity presented itself with the South Dakota Board of Regents in a position that I never really envisioned to be an option for me professionally. I oftentimes think that when we're younger, we tend to be very short-sighted in the opportunities that might be available back home, and especially in the rural areas of the state, and especially the states that we love. When judging from only a professional level, that may be the case early on, and we tend to approach a career plan with a very, very narrow lens that limits a lot of the opportunities that you could have. However, from a community and a family perspective, returning home presents one of the most comprehensive arrays of opportunities. As I reflect back on my 12 years in my home community and the various achievements that I've had, I would say, yes, I made significant professional accomplishments. However, I would say my most lasting impact during this time will be the contributions that I've made to my family the community and the region in which I lived. I had the opportunity to raise 3 boys in a small, safe community that has been positively impacted their ability to go away from home and have some success. For 7 years, I was fortunate to work alongside my mother, who I referenced at the beginning of this conversation, who just happened to work at a state agency that was the South Dakota Board of Regents. Additionally, 10 years of my time back home allowed me to be able to spend time with my parents who died at an early age as well. Whatever your professional career, whatever my professional career would have taken me, if I had stayed in Iowa and taken the path that was easy as a faculty member, makes it difficult for me to really reflect back and feel that the decision to return home wasn't a really rewarding one. Lesson number 3, the purpose of life. Getting real deep now. During my first year in Lincoln, I had the opportunity to attend the Nebraska Land Foundation's honoring of Dr. Sarah Crook. She was a faculty member at Peru State College. In her comment, she closed with what she believes is the purpose of life, that you want to find your talent and then spend the rest of your life sharing that talent with the world. I would say that those comments have certainly resonated with me over the past 3 years, and in preparation for today, they made me seriously think about the talent, or what my talent would be, and have I spent time over the last 30 to 40 years giving that talent back to others to help make them better. If I had to specify what I'm really good at, I would say that it would be the ability to organize and bring organization to situations that lack clarity or focus and direction. When reflecting on my professional career, I can identify a very wide range of projects and initiatives that have been positively impacted by my ability to organize the efforts of others, whether that influences students, institutions, or even my colleagues. I would say the ability to build partnerships and collaborations where sometimes resistance might have been there previously has helped facilitate things like a comprehensive redesign of general education, implementation of a very solid math pathway initiative to help improve student success, and also here in the state to help us overcome the pandemic that we've faced over the last 2 years. I would say directly for here at Chadron State College, I think I arrived at a time, at the right time, to help culminate the efforts to help build the support for the funding for the math science project and advocate for the continuation or additional funding so that we didn't have to do that project in a series of phases. And I think that was done by coordinating and organizing the work here on this campus to make that compelling argument that this would be a facility that has a really good return on investment for students, for our faculty, for the college, for the region, and also for the state. On more of a community level, I was initially encouraged to run for our local school board and peer. I would say not as a particular issue to have resolved, but because school board members really need to have a vested interest in making sure that education is there for all students and have a really strong investment in public education. Once elected, that position transitioned to also serving on our local United Way board, on a local community foundation board, also on the state library board. Oftentimes I think this kind of issue about organization has helped me prioritize where anytime I felt that it becomes difficult to take on just one more new thing, I figure out a way to prioritize those things that are the most important and let the other things fall aside so that you can continue to give of the skills that you have. I would say, lastly, one of the most rewarding outcomes of my ability to organize has been the contributions to growing the sport of wrestling. I encouraged all 3 of my boys to wrestle, and when we first moved back to Pierre, I was a little disappointed in the quality of the high school wrestling team. That year, not one wrestler had advanced and placed at the state tournament. I certainly wanted a little bit more for my sons, which meant I needed to jump in, and I began to coach. I became the vice president of our local club. I then became the president. And then over the course of about 12 years, we really changed and organized and worked collectively together with a lot of really vested people to change that outlook. During this time, we transitioned the program from no state place winners to having 13 or 14 wrestlers place at the state tournament, with 5 or 6 in the finals almost every year. By the time my twin sons had graduated high school, the team had won 6 of 7 state titles, and then my sons had won 6 individual titles themselves. What I would argue is that winning was certainly very exciting, but winning as a community, winning with your friends and colleagues who you'd worked so hard to accomplish something so meaningful to all of you was probably one of the things that I felt that I brought best to that organization. If I go back to my example of people's perceptions of you never change, one stat I like to use every once in a while is that the Turmans are 9-1 in state semifinal appearances in high school. my twins and my youngest son quickly note, now wait a minute, we are 9-0. You are 0-1 in state semifinals. And oftentimes I would run into people that I wrestled in high school that would see my sons and think, oh, I recognize the name. I didn't think they were yours because I don't really remember you being that good. I'm just really good at organizing. I would say in conclusion, John Burtis, a colleague of mine at the University of Northern Iowa, once noted that we seldom look back and experience regret when we take a new path. Instead, you regret the choices that you don't make because you fear change. He described this issue of counterfactual regret, which can be a debilitating type of experience for people because we spend so much time thinking, boy, what if, or what might have been. The one common theme across all these three lessons I've shared is that in years to come, you will be faced with different paths. Going in an alternate direction will need to be a decision that will need to be made. And you're going to need to give your time and energy to others, and that will be an uncertainty-provoking experience. What I would encourage all of you to do is to confront that uncertainty and go head on, knowing that three things are going to happen. It will force people's perceptions of you to change over time. You will find that going home again might be a viable option that's worth pursuing, or that sharing your talent with the world and also can produce significant rewards for you and those that are around you. So congratulations, graduates, and I wish you the best of luck as you pursue opportunities into the future. Thank you.